Not only is Congress attempting to merge the Israeli Defense Forces with our own military in Section 224 of the National Defense Authorization Act, it looks like Congress is also pushing to fuse our intelligence agencies together as part of an intelligence authorization bill. Now, this is not getting the type of attention Section 224 is getting, but hopefully we can spread the word about this and stop it from getting passed. So this was covered in Responsible Statecraft. The piece is titled, Senate Wants to Force US to Share Sensitive Intel with Israel. A measure in a must-pass bill would dramatically increase Israeli access to American secrets. So the details are laid out in this piece written by Paul Pillar. And basically, the bill was put forward by Republican Senator Tom Cotton, which is unsurprising. He is certainly very favorable to the nation state of Israel. And Pillar writes that Section 622 would prohibit any suspension, reduction, or limitation of such intelligence sharing except on the basis of a specific and identifiable national security concern determined by the president. Now, if the president of the United States is the only check on this intelligence sharing, mechanism, we'd be in a lot of trouble, especially if you're dealing with presidents like Donald Trump, who has given Israel everything and anything they've wanted, even at the detriment of the American people, even at the detriment of the Republican Party. But there is one other so-called check on this mechanism. As Pillar writes, any such exception would require a report to Congress within 15 days detailing not only the reason for the change, but also the categories of information involved. The same report would require an assessment of the anticipated impact on regional security and various other matters. So this required report to Congress would essentially dump the issue on Capitol Hill, where you also have a big problem with the Israel lobby corrupting our politicians and basically persuading them to carry out actions that wouldn't even necessarily benefit the United States. So this is basically a way for our government to carry water for Israel, despite the reality that the majority in the United States, the majority of voters have an unfavorable view of Israel and in fact want to halt military aid to Israel. The mandating of intelligence sharing, as Pillar writes, is even farther removed from public visibility and accountability than the defense integration, and even less likely to stimulate thoughts about American taxpayers' money going to a foreign country. And so to help us make some sense of this reporting and what the future holds for the US should this pass is Trita Parsi. Trita, thank you, by the way, for co-founding a publication that actually informs Americans about what's going on, because no one in the mainstream press is reporting about this provision in the intelligence authorization bill. But talk to us a little bit about just how disastrous this really would be, how it could potentially work against our own interests here in the United States.
First of all, thank you so much for also bringing attention to this. And let me start off by saying two things. First, a tremendous amount of credit needs to go to Kelly Blaus, who is the editor of Responsible Statecraft and has really done a remarkable job building it up to be one of the largest foreign policy sites in the United States right now, that is specifically putting forward a restraint-oriented analysis and perspective on matters. And it's one of these places where things like this can get published, because we do have amazing, and this is the second point, experts such as Paul Pillar. Paul is a legend. He is a senior person who was the author of several NIEs when he was at the CIA. He is one of the key people who pushed back against Dick Cheney when he was trying to cook the intelligence on the Iraq War. In fact, there's some minor roles in Hollywood that have been dedicated to the role that he played in all of this. And his analysis, of course, is just state of the art. And what he's pointing out here is that while we are seeing this broader process in which the Israelis are just plummeting amongst the American public on every demographic, with the exception of boomer Republicans, they are desperately moving forward with some extremely aggressive measures to try to essentially take what in the past was in the public domain and had some checks and balances, reinforce it, but put it somewhere else within the interaction between the two countries so that it is out of the public domain. It is not scrutinized by the public or by Congress. Or that there isn't a vote up and down like for what was going to happen with 224 if it passes, that essentially embeds Israel in some of the US's production of weapons, etc. And now we're doing the same thing on the intelligence front. And he points out in the article the irony that Congress has like given up its constitutional responsibility on matters of war and peace, but then wants to come in and micromanage how intelligence is being shared with Israel, with the normal state being that everything essentially has to be shared. And only if there is something that shouldn't, that's when the president has to intervene in order to make sure that something is not shared with the Israelis. And he goes into the article extensively on how this is also then going to create a lot of problems with other countries, because we have to manage these different relations. We have, full-time staff that is managing to make sure that intelligence is not shared in a manner that could be detrimental to other allies. And the United States, of course, has a very extensive alliance system. But it's also happening with a country that has an extensive history of taking US intelligence, spying on the US, or having spies inside the system that has been selling that information to hostile states, whether that is to the Soviet Union, which is what Jonathan Pollock did, or whether it is to the Chinese. And this comes in the heel of the fact that we had a New York Times story that revealed that the Israeli espionage on key individuals within the US government right now is now at an all-time high. I think the way he put it in the article, referring to it is like it's completely unhinged at this point. So we have a state that in the intelligence setting, Paul points out, is actually an adversary rather than an ally. And now Congress is going to mandate the exchange or the release of that information to the Israelis. And if anything needs to be stopped, the president himself needs to intervene. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion, but it tells you how far they're going and trying to get these kind of things into place before they completely lose the American public. And once they do, it will take a long time to undo a lot of these different things.
I don't know if you've noticed, but everything sucks now. It feels like just about everything that we used to love is worse and somehow also more expensive at the same time. Don't believe me? Pick up your phone, scroll for a minute or two. Yeah, take a look at a few sites. You see it? I told you. But what if there was something better and cheaper? What if, in fact, it was free? Well, that phone that you were just using to view our society's collapse in real time, I'm willing to bet that phone plan you're on is actually pretty pricey, right? Well, get a load of this. Andrew Yang, he launched a phone company and he wants you to try it out for free all summer long. That's right, 3 free months when you switch. No catch, no trick, totally 100% free. Still not convinced? Well, Noble Mobile actually pays you to use your phone less. For any unused data, you get cash back. The less data you use, the more cash back right into your pocket. So enjoy the free summer. Have fun, live in the moment. And if you can avoid doom scrolling, that 4th month will be way less than your current phone bill, and you'll still get great coverage on T-Mobile's 5G network. Less soul-crushing anxiety, lower phone bill. It's a win-win. Maybe not everything has to suck after all. So make the switch today at tyt.com/switch. That's tyt.com/switch.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And just to really drive that point home, I want to show the audience and you a video that I think you might be a little bit surprised by. Because historically speaking, in the United States, there's always been some dissent among the left in regard to the US alliance with Israel. That wasn't really the case with right-wingers or people who can lean conservatively or as conservatives. And so what's been arising as a result of the last nearly 3 years is a group of conservatives who are not only questioning our relationship with Israel, but they're increasingly becoming agitated with the amount of aid that the United States is forced, the taxpayers in the United States are forced to provide to Israel, a country that had an economic surplus in 2021, when we at this current moment are drowning in $40 trillion in debt. And so this next video is a prominent conservative and former Navy SEAL. His name is Sean Ryan, and I happened to be listening to his podcast just yesterday, and this moment really stood out to me. And so, he speaks like a Navy SEAL would. So just take a listen to this.
Israel is the one thing since 9/11 that I've seen everybody rallying around. Get off our.
Yep.
We're tired of paying for your education. We're tired of paying for your universal health care. We're tired of paying for your Iron Dome. We're tired of paying for your missile defense. We are a cow pasture for Israel. We're tired of fighting your wars. We're tired of dying for your causes. And everybody sees that the United States of America is nothing but a cow pasture full of cattle to send tax money and fight the wars.
Trita, your reaction to that?
Look, I gotta tell you, amongst a lot of former officials, amongst a lot of former military servicemen, I've come across perhaps not as colorful of a language as we saw here, but the sentiment by no means is at this point unusual. This is not a fringe opinion at this point. This is an opinion that is widely shared. And I think this is one of the things that folks on the left also did not pay as much attention to. That the turn against the relationship or the manner in which this relationship with Israel is so unbalanced, the way it's turned against that on the right is very, very fast, very hard, and perhaps surprising some folks on the left. It has not come out of some sort of a sympathy or empathy with the Palestinians. Now, although we're also seeing some growth of that on the right, but particularly with people like Tucker and others. But it's not necessarily the main reason for it. The main reason is that you have a lot of folks on the right who have come to the conclusion that most of these past wars have been for the service of or the interest of another country. And they feel that they have become completely screwed over. They're the ones, I mean, the average American soldier is not coming from the left. You know, the majority of them, of course, are coming from poorer districts in the South and other areas. And that it's these districts, the red districts, where you have American soldiers coming home in coffins with PTSD, committing suicide, losing a limb. And it's just created this festering anger as to why they've been sent off to all of these wars. And at first, the anger was at the American elite for having done so, and that's still there. But now it's also extended itself to these other countries that have played a critical role in bringing the United States into these wars. And even if there was this tension earlier on, if we say 5 years ago, there would have been a lot of tension because a lot of the folks on the right were becoming angry about this, but at the same time, they had this pro-Israel tilt and they were like uncomfortable really breaking with Israel. I think the breaking points came last February and last June. Because as soon as Trump came into office, and these folks, you know, they had their other agendas, they wanted to focus on fentanyl, they wanted to focus on border issues. And the first things that happen is that the Israelis come to Washington. And this is just a couple of weeks after, 2 or 3 weeks after Trump takes office. And immediately they're pushing him for a war with Iran. And you had these stories coming out in the New York Times of how much they were pushing and how in the first round of that debate, they lost. But they kept at it. They kept at it and started attacking a lot of American officials who were too opposed to it and softened them. And then by May, the decision seems to have been shifted. And by June, they attack and the US then joins in. And Trump, who was supposed to say no to these things, who had promised to keep the neocons out of his administration in this second round, ended up going along with it. And unlike the Iraq war, in which was a little bit more murky, what was the role of Israel? And in this one, it was just crystal clear that the Israelis were pushing for it. There was no denying, there was no attempt to obfuscate, to confuse people about it. It was just utterly clear that this was the Israelis doing this. And then again, in December of last year, when the beginning of this second war started off with the initial pressure to go to war. So, there's no mystery any longer. Yes, a lot of countries have pushed the United States into war. They have treated the United States as some sort of a private mercenary army that is at their disposal. But no country has done so more than Israel. And once these things break on the right, they tend to break really fast and really hard. And that's part of the reason why you're seeing such a colorful language coming from a lot of folks who have served, who feel betrayed, but not only by their own leaders, but also now understanding that their leaders were not only acting on their own interest or for whatever factors and reasons they had, but also because of the pressure that they were faced with by foreign countries. And particularly when it comes to the Middle East, it's clearly Israel that is the main factor.
I want to ask you something that does call for some speculation, which I know you don't like to do, but I am really curious what you think, because that comparison between the invasion of Iraq and what we're doing now in Iran is a really important one, because you're right, there was murkiness. It was harder to decipher whether Israel had an influence on whether we decided to engage in that preemptive war. However, this time around with Iraq, I mean, the Israelis didn't really feel the need to shroud what they were doing in any secrecy whatsoever. They were rubbing it in our faces from the very beginning. Netanyahu saying that he's dreamed of the day that the United States would go to war with Iran. I mean, he was very open about that. You have Donald Trump bragging about how he has a 99% approval rating among the Israelis, while his approval rating here in the United States is 30%. And so it's hard to deny that we are fighting a war, not on behalf of what's in the best interest of the American people, but we're fighting a war on behalf of Israel to our detriment and the detriment of the global economy. Why do you think the Israelis feel as emboldened as they are right now to basically tell us right to our faces what they're gonna do? And may I add, they've also been pretty clear about how they intend or are pushing for US boots on the ground, which I don't think is gonna happen, but would be disastrous if it would. They don't want to send IDF soldiers there, and they just say it brazenly. Why do you think they feel emboldened to do that?
I think there's a couple of factors, and I can't really weigh them against each other to say which ones are the most important one, but I'll just name a few of them that I can think of right on the spot. First of all, I think the Israelis saw the writing on the wall. They realized that they did not have much more time. They were losing the American public, and they were losing particularly the younger generation, both on the left and on the right. It's very important to recognize that the numbers on the American right amongst the young people is not that different from what it is on the American left when it comes to the issue of Israel. And as a result, if they needed to achieve anything, they had to do it quickly. They were in a rush. And as a result, I don't think they believed that they had the time necessarily to go through all of the different moves or trying to conceal what they were doing. I think that's one factor. Another factor I think is very important is that after October 7th, you had this situation that Biden himself created. I mean, the entire strategy of Biden, they call it themselves a bear hug. Let's give Israel everything it asks for. And that then, for some reason, would give the United States leverage, which is such a problematic and idiotic approach, to be frank with you, because first of all, it assumes that the United States starts off that equation with no credibility or leverage to begin with. In what universe does the United States not have leverage to begin with? And that he actually has to do something like that, give the Israelis everything they want so they can commit a genocide in order to have leverage. It makes absolutely no sense. But Biden set the stage for this. And Trump is, of course, completely following that at this point. And I think it gave them a completely different confidence. You can ignore the American public if you have a president that is willing to go along with what you're selling them. And particularly if you can cut the rest of the bureaucracy in the United States out and you go directly to the president, which was not so much the case under Biden, although there was a bit of that as well, but certainly is the case right now. And when you listen to someone like Joe Kent, who resigned over this, is because the parts of the very important parts of the U.S. government that he was in was cut out, and the president was not taking into account the perspectives and the intelligence that was coming from the U.S. government itself, but instead was listening directly to the Israelis. And under those circumstances, they have an ability to get a quick decision that completely fast circuits the rest of the policy process. Frankly, there's not much of a policy process in the US government right now. And when you have that type of an opportunity from their perspective, they're gonna move fast instead of going through the other motions in which they're trying to push the country in a direction while keeping their fingerprints off it as far as possible. And I'm sure there's other factors as well, but I think it's, first of all, I think it's very important to note what you're saying, because if you just go back 7 or 8 years, the proponents of war did not argue explicitly for war. The proponents of war were arguing against all other options and trying to kill the credibility of all other options in order to make war the only remaining option, but without actively arguing in favor of it. Look at how FDD was couching its arguments a couple of years ago, getting really upset, feigning some anger if anyone accused them of being warmongers. But now it's just completely open.
Yeah, now they're letting their freak flag fly.
Exactly.
Yeah, we love more. We want more. Yeah.
Because they have direct access.
Yeah.
Because they go straight to the top. They can ignore the American public. They believe that they can afford to, they can achieve it, and as a result, they don't need to. And instead, they're not, their audience is not the American public. They go on Fox because their audience is an audience of one. They want to reach the president directly. Yeah. So they're putting forward all of their different arguments, and their arguments with him has to be something big, something historic, something that brings a legacy. And I think they've been very astute at playing him and his psychology and the type of arguments that he would be susceptible to.
Well, what's ironic about this whole situation is the war against Iran at this moment has made Israel less safe, not more safe.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.